One of Game of Thrones' biggest reveals is Jon Snow's true parentage, as he's not really the bastard son of Ned Stark. Ned tells this lie to keep him safe from Robert Baratheon, as Jon is actually the legitimate child of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Ned's sister, Lyanna Stark. Robert's rebellion is founded on the lie that Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna Stark, but the two were actually in love with one another. Jon is the result of their union, though Robert Baratheon would kill him if he knew, just as he tried to kill Daenerys and Viserys early in Game of Thrones. Ned's willingness to risk his own marriage and upend his honorable reputation to save Jon is admirable. However, he's lucky that Jon Snow's appearance made his lie so believable. Jon is one of the rare Targaryens to have dark hair and eyes in both George R.R. Martin's books and Game of Thrones. Had Jon been born with more obvious Targaryen traits, like their silver blonde hair and the purple eyes they have in the source material, Ned would have had a more difficult time passing him off as his own child. Could Ned Stark have claimed Ashara Dane was Jon Snow's mother? Princess Elia Martell's lady-in-waiting had purple eyes. Kit Harington wearing a black cloak as Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, with the wall in the background custom image by Yida Chacon. Ashara Dane, Princess Elia Martell's lady-in-waiting, is described as having violet eyes in Martin's books, so it's possible Ned Stark could have passed her off as Jon Snow's mother if he'd looked more like a Targaryen. Ashara Dane is present at the tourney where Rhaegar and Lyanna first meet, and she and Ned even dance together. Ned also visits her in Dorne, returning her brother's sword after he dies at the Tower of Joy. Ned could have used these opportunities to be unfaithful to Cat, so claiming Ashara was Jon's mother would have been believable. Ashara Dane also dies not long after her brother, so she wouldn't be able to contest Ned's claims about Jon. Ned would still need to contend with Jon having silver blonde hair, but even this has an answer. Although Ashara herself doesn't have silver hair, there are a few Danes that do, including Gayrold. The genetics might be questionable, but Jon could have inherited such a trait from his ancestors. If Robert never questioned the blonde hair of his own children, he might be convinced that Jon's silver hair came from the Danes. Ned might have had to send Jon Snow away to Essos. He would have grown up similar to Daenerys and Viserys. Illyrio Mapartis with Daenerys and Viserys in Essos in Game of Thrones Season 1. If Jon had silver blonde hair and purple eyes, passing him off as Ashara Dane's child would be the most difficult path forward for Ned. More likely, he'd have to hide Jon from Robert. He could do this by sending him to Essos, where he'd have a similar upbringing to Daenerys and Viserys Targaryen. It's not entirely clear how the logistics of this would work. Ned would need to reach out to someone like Sir Willem D'Ari or Illyrio in order to find Jon a place to live in Essos. He'd also have to find a way to get him there, utilizing those still loyal to House Targaryen to do so. All of this would be extremely risky for both Ned and Jon, and there's no telling what would become of Jon after he arrived in Essos. Assuming Ned could get a hold of someone who knew where Daenerys and Viserys were, he might have grown up alongside fellow Targaryens. This would significantly change Jon's character and the plot of Game of Thrones. While hiding Jon in Essos might be slightly easier than convincing Robert is Ashara Dane's son, there's probably an even better way Ned could have concealed Jon's existence. However, it would still mean a very different upbringing for him, and it would still come with the risk of betrayal. Jon Snow could have been hidden with Howland Reed. He could have been raised by Meera and Jojen's father. Howland Reed standing with soldiers at the Tower of Joy in Game of Thrones. Ned also could have hidden Jon away in the north if he'd looked like a Targaryen, but he'd need to be careful with how he went about such a thing. As Meera and Jojen Reed's father, Howland Reed, is loyal to the Starks throughout the series, and present at the Tower of Joy, it's possible he could have taken Jon under his wing. It's unlikely Jon would have been discovered going north with Howland, as the Reeds are pretty isolated, even by the North standards. No one would have to know about Jon, so no one would come looking for him. Hiding Jon in the north would still come with some significant risks, as word could get out about his true identity, especially if his appearance stood out. The Boltons are proof that not every Northerner is trustworthy, and some of them seized the opportunity to betray Robb and Catelyn Stark in Game of Thrones. It's possible they'd do the same if they learned the Reeds were harboring a Targaryen, especially since the North has no love of House Targaryen. Still, if Ned and Howland went about their plan carefully, they might be able to keep Jon safe a bit closer to home. Ned Stark could have admitted the truth and defied Robert Baratheon. This would be the most risky approach to the situation. The riskiest approach to dealing with Jon Snow looking like a Targaryen, and knowing Ned, it might be the one he'd take, would be to confront Robert Baratheon with the truth. Ned could risk telling Robert about Jon's true parentage, though it would likely enrage his friend. Since he sent assassins after Daenerys and Viserys, it's clear he has no qualms about killing children. He likely wouldn't respect Ned's pleas, especially after losing Lyanna. Of course, Ned Stark could also admit the truth on a larger scale and defy Robert Baratheon. If people knew there were still Targaryens, it's possible they wouldn't support Robert's claim to the Iron Throne. It's also possible they'd stand behind someone like Ned as king or regent, especially since he reached King's Landing first. Of course, Robert earned respect and loyalty on the battlefield during Robert's rebellion, so this might not go so well for Ned. It's probably for the best he didn't have to defy Robert, as Jon came out looking more Stark than Targaryen in Game of Thrones.